Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church and the leader of the Reach Movement team. And we are building a movement of churches that grow and multiply here in Michigan. And perhaps now, as we branch out in these kind of webinars and online beyond Michigan. But how do you grow and multiply in the current mission field of COVID-19? Everything we knew about how to be and do church seems to have vanished. The world is different. Can the church be different too? That's what we're here to explore over these 3 weeks and 3 #ChurchDifferent webinars. To help our missional imaginations, we've gathered together some great church leaders from across the country who tend to be on the front edge of, or the front end of the adaptive curve for ministry. Each webinar will feature a pastor of a large church, a pastor of a smaller church, and a coach or consultant who's working with a lot of different churches, multiple churches. We'll explore how the church is adapting to accomplish its mission in this different world to still make more disciples of Jesus Christ to transform the world. You may wonder, I added a word in there, didn't I? Actually, I picked it up from Bishop Williman, who said that our mission statement was missing the word more, to make more disciples of Jesus Christ to transform the world. If you're watching on Facebook right now, would you take a moment and share this webinar so that your friends can have the opportunity to join in too? And don't forget that you can post questions in the Q&A section of Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. And our Reach Resources executive producer, Leslie Schneider, will be following those and moderating the Q&A later in the webinar. Leslie, go ahead and spotlight yourself so people see you there. Are you there, Leslie? There we are. All right. Well, let me begin by introducing our panelists for today. Jorge Acevedo is our first panelist. George is the lead pastor of Grace Church and a multi-site in Cape Coral, Florida. I'm a little envious right now. That looks like you're in a t-shirt, George. We're not quite there yet here in Michigan.
And shorts.
And shorts. Well, we were guessing whether you had anything, whether any of us are wearing anything from basically here down. I had the opportunity to spend 10 days with you, George, and your team last August. It was probably the best continuing education event that I've ever had to do, to go deep into one church's culture. And what I learned was that they have really pioneered what it means to be an authentic, raw, real recovery church. I was deeply impressed with the level of trust that their team shared and the time that they took to build that trust. And I had a great interview with George about building trust in your teams that you can find at reachresources.org. George, thanks so much for being with us today. Anything that I missed in that introduction that you want to add?
Well, I love Jesus and barbecue and my 4 grandkids a lot. That's right at the top of my list. I think you missed that.
I believe you were barbecuing yourself here lately.
Yeah, that's what this is. This is the residual of, my COVID injury right there. There it is. I think it might be helpful for folks to know that I'm beginning my 25th year at the same assignment, 1 year at a time for 25 years, Grace Church. And so there's something fun about getting to the silver anniversary this next year, and pretty excited about that. And then maybe lastly, just recently co-authored a book with Michael Beck. He did about 90% of the lifting on the book, and I added a little bit to that to partner with him. He calls me his Snoop Dogg. He says I'm his, kind of his.
I saw that on Facebook. He's Eminem, and you're his Snoop Dogg. So
I'm his Snoop Dogg.
I forgot to introduce you as such.
We could do that.
Right.
But I'm pretty excited about Fresh Expressions of Church as a new generative community for us at Grace Church. And so, that might be helpful to people.
And we have Michael Beck in a future episode of this.
So get ready.
Yeah. All right, our second panelist is Kim Griffith. Kim is a consultant, coach, and church planter who specializes in StrengthsFinder. She's worked in the local church and for both her statewide conference and the global denomination as a strategist. And we've had her up to Michigan several times for leadership events at the Reach Summit, including last year's Reach Summit. Kim's husband, Jim, also happens to be my leadership coach. So if anything goes wrong today, Kim and I are going to blame it on my coach, her husband.
That's right.
Kim, thanks so much for joining us today as well from Florida. I can see that you don't have long sleeves on either. So
No, it's nice and toasty in Orlando.
Anything you want to add to that introduction?
Well, it's great to be here, and it's great to be here with George. I was a church planter many years ago in Florida, and George actually is one of the people that kind of gave me the push to go for it when I felt that calling. So it's nice to be here with him and be here with all of you. It's been such an interesting couple of months, and it's exciting to be able to have these conversations and talk about the things that we're seeing and the ways that God is really doing incredible things in churches of all sizes right now. So thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to have you on, and we have a coach or consultant on each one of these webinars because you all get a picture that we don't all get. You're talking to so many different pastors and seeing so many different churches adapt, whereas most of us are just in the weeds of our one church. So thank you so much for joining us. Our third panelist today is Mark Aupperlee. Mark is the campus pastor of Sycamore Creek's First Adoption in Potterville, Michigan. I say first not because we have a second, but because I'm hoping for a second. Before he was a pastor, he was a breast cancer researcher at Michigan State University, so sometimes I refer to him as the Reverend Dr. Mark Aupperlee. Mark has led a struggling and shrinking church through a process of adoption and revitalization, and has seen a 10 to 20% growth rate over the past 3 years of being a pastor there. So we'll see what it looks like this year, although I'm not even sure we're counting attendance these days. His mission field is small town America, and he does a great job of effectively adapting Sycamore Creek systems to that mission field. Mark, thanks for not saying no when your boss asked you to join the webinar today.
I didn't know that was an option. I could have said no. Man.
Is there anything else you want to add by way of introduction?
I just add that I'm relatively new as a pastor. I became a pastor through that adoption process. So I've been a pastor for about 3.5 years now, and I'm a local pastor and I'm in the course of study process. And so this is a nice break. I was writing papers all morning, and now I get to be on here with you all, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know, of course, you're navigating adapting to this and adapting to course of study changing and everything else that we're all adapting to. So
yes,
thanks for not saying no to your boss. Let's start this webinar by going against the grain of how I set this whole thing up as a church different, with what's not different about the world and the church right now. What's the same as it always has been? Let's kind of like find that bedrock truth. George, what's the same about the church right now? What's not different?
Yeah, you use the metaphor that those of us that are local pastors tend to get caught in the weeds of our own environment and where we find ourselves, our station. And so when you ask me what's the same, I'm localizing that. But I think it's true at the micro as well as the macro level. Here's what I would say. For us, what's the same is what we call our Grace Church Playbook. Right next to Scripture, it's for us, I wouldn't call it a sacred or holy document, but it's what defines, it's a very small little pamphlet really, that defines what our mission is, our vision, our values, our strategy, kind of the guidelines around our strategy and our structure, as well as our theology. And we think it doesn't matter what the winds of culture or circumstance, the mission that we're on, keeping the values that we're on, even the strategy, and I'm talking about at the macro level strategy that we're on, the way in which we make disciples. Those things have not changed. What's not changed for us is that we believe that churches are to grow spiritual leaders that live in community, who on teams create transformational environments and cultures, and that's art more than science, and who figure out fruitful processes. Most of us probably on this call are in the Wesleyan stream, and Mr. Wesley was really big on processes of how do you help people move through grace, and how do they experience that? And so for us, those processes, we think, again, at the macro level, they don't change. I would say one of the things that's not changed for us and is the same as it's always been, one of our core values is that we're strategically team-based. And in the past, that's meant a lot of face-to-face, in-person meetings. And now it means a lot more Zoom meetings and a lot more digital kinds of conversations. And so, we're still passionate about checking in on one another, helping one another through the type of season of innovation that we're all having to live in. And then I think I would also say what's not changed for us is that we fundamentally believe, and I think, again, every church, that their responsibility is to cultivate a generative community, a community that's multiplying, that's making more disciples. I'm glad to hear that. More disciples of Jesus for the transformation of the world. I might add more and more mature disciples. Yeah. We want people to grow up. I've been, during these days, reading a lot of Pete Scazzero's material on emotionally healthy church, and we're going to do a whole 8-week series on it this fall. We think it's time to do that, but we need to make more and more better, if you will, disciples of Jesus.
Yeah,
more and better disciples.
Yeah.
So the generative communities, and for us, we've always talked about campuses. We've talked about recovery communities because that's a big value for us. We've here recently more been talking about fresh expressions, and then we used to have this little addendum over here that we called kind of our digital thing, and it was just kind of a set it and forget it. It's not interesting that the context within which we do campuses, fresh expressions, and recovery communities have all gone away. And now this little appendage over here has now taken center stage. And I was just in a meeting yesterday where our teams were saying, how do we look for the new future where what was an appendage is now like close to the center of the bullseye of a fourth kind of generative community that we need to create.
Yeah. So. Well, we're going to come back to that in just a minute, but Kim, George has gotten on first base. You're up to bat. What's the same about the world? What's not different?
So as I'm just talking to pastors in all different settings, one thing that's the same is pastors are still working really hard. It's not like, oh, they're home and just hanging out. Pastors are working as hard as ever, just doing some different tasks. They may not be able to go to the hospital to visit somebody, but they're doing pastoral care via Zoom and phone calls and figuring out how to do online worship. So they're working really hard. And with that, the thing that hasn't changed is pastors still need boundaries. Because now that they're working at home, it's even harder, I think, for some of them to stop working. And so they're working all of the time. So
has my wife been talking to you?
No, but I can imagine what she would say. So I think that's the same. People are still hungry for community. In some sense, it's hungrier for community within the church and just within the world. People are finding a myriad of ways to gather together, whether it's virtual happy hours, cooking classes, whatever. People are finding ways to connect, and with the church, we're finding ways to plug into that. And so that's been exciting. And interestingly, people are still giving, even with all of the economic uncertainty and difficulty happening. Several of the churches that I'm talking with are actually seeing an increase in giving, and they had a better month last month than they did in January. So, yeah, it's been interesting to see that dynamic.
We've had that experience too, which has both delighted us and surprised us, and just kind of given us a sense of firm financial foundation from which to be creative with. So, so grateful for that. All right, Mark, George is on second, Kim is on first. You're batting cleanup. What do you want to add that's not different or that's the same right now?
I was going to say that it's a challenge to go third. I feel like I have to play off what George and Kim said already. Playing off a little bit what Kim said, Tom, you and I were meeting yesterday, and we talked about how one of the things that stayed the same is, as a pastor, we still need to cultivate our soul and work on our relationship with God. And that pastoring really starts with that, and making sure that that relationship is strong and that we're taking care of our soul. And then from there, we're able to lead in this uncertain time. And the other thing that we talked about is taking care of our family and how important that is. And that really, if we're healthy pastors, we're starting with our soul, we're taking care of our family, and then in turn, we're being a pastor and we're caring for our church. And it starts with that firm foundation. And I don't think that has changed. And maybe even in the midst of all the changes, that's even more important right now. I think, like George said, we've looked at Sycamore Creek and recognized that our mission and our vision and our values are still the same. We're just living them out in different ways right now, with the transition from doing things face-to-face to primarily through a digital medium. And I think in the midst of that, we recognize that people still need Jesus, and it's the mission of our church to be the light to the world, to be salt. And we will continue to do that. And the other thing that people really need is a community. They need a body of Christ that helps point them together to Christ. And I think that sense of need for community has been even enhanced through all of this. We recognize how important it is, how important those connections are.
Would you mind taking that reflection about soul care and family care just a little step further and sharing your reaction to that as you thought about your own situation?
Sure. So, thinking of my own situation, I am so grateful that in the midst of this, I had developed some key habits in terms of my devotional life, in terms of I'm in small groups and lead small groups in our church. And I need other people around me who are helping encourage me to have that deep relationship with Christ. Yes, I have personal practices that I have, but there's also been communal practices that have been an essential part of taking care of my soul. One of the things I love is, Tom, you and I meet regularly, and we ask how we're doing with our soul care. And it's really important to have people who are alongside of you in the midst of that. And I was just on a call before this with some other clergy, and we were talking about that. And we need to make use of our colleagues and reach out to each other, not just for how to do things differently with church, but to care for one another's souls in the midst of this.
Yeah. Hey, attendees, we want you to remember that you can type your questions in the Q&A panel here in Zoom, or if you are watching on Facebook, you can type them in the comments. And Leslie Schneider, our producer, will be paying attention to those, and she'll be bringing those comments to our panel in just towards the half end of this webinar today. Let's turn our attention to what's different. There are so many topics to discuss about the church right now. Leadership, connecting with people, worship online or in homes, discipleship when you're not face-to-face, evangelism, how do you attract a crowd when it's not safe to be in a crowd? Serving and volunteering in the church when big events no longer require a lot of people. Outreach and mission into the community to meet the needs of our neighbors. How we communicate as preachers through a screen, and how we as churches communicate with one another digitally. How we nurture stewardship and generosity. Now, we don't expect each panelist to hit on all of those areas in each one of these webinars, but we figure that by the time we've gone through 3 of them, we'll hit on at least most of those topics. So we want each of the panelists to pick one area where you've seen some real effective adaptation in your sphere of influence, and tell us what's different about that way of being or doing church. So I'm going to start with Kim. Kim has that, again, that unique perspective of seeing lots of churches doing things. So Kim, pick one of those areas or topics, and where do you see a church or churches adapting in a really effective way?
Well, really in all of them, but when I'm thinking about connection, it's interesting in terms of connecting with one another. I'm hearing stories of they're figuring out ways for different church members to have lists to call one another so that they're making those daily connections. And interestingly, shut-ins who, used to be kind of on a schedule to visit are actually now getting far more calls and cards and things from people who are now also shut in. And so congregations are really stepping up to take care of one another in the midst of it, and are calling and finding ways to connect or virtually, and actually connecting more than they were in person. People are not missing their small groups. People are creating new book studies. And so people who used to maybe see each other on Sunday, and if they didn't go to church every Sunday, only every couple times a month, are literally seeing each other at least weekly now.
It seems like a piece of this has been that really the idea that church was a once a week thing has been, I mean, it never was, but that illusion has just been stripped away. It's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. And that feels like to me something to celebrate.
It's incredible. The stories of connections and people just having deep conversations that they would have missed otherwise because they were busy during the week and kind of not making those connections are incredible. And then in terms of outside the church, because yes, how do we connect outside when we're supposed to be quarantined? One church I'm working with did something called blessing boxes, and they asked their members, when their members went to the grocery store, to pick up some snacks and gift cards for essential workers, and they kept a box out front of the church for people to drop things off in. And then they put together these boxes, and the pastors delivered them to essential workers in the community just to let them know that they were there. So churches are finding ways to connect. Another church bought baskets of hanging flowers and went around their neighborhood right around the church and hung those flowers from trees or mailboxes just to say, hey, we're here and we're praying for you. So people are finding ways to safely get out in the community and let people know we're here and we're thinking about you.
It strikes me that you could take your flower budget for your sanctuary and turn that towards beautification of the community.
Yeah, exactly. So people are coming up with a lot of really neat ideas to connect with the people around them and let them know that, hey, we're here. In fact, even connecting with first-time guests on your virtual worship. People are scheduling Zoom coffee hours with first-time guests. Because, if somebody registers their attendance at your Facebook Live or virtual worship, they're saying, hey, I'm here, contact me. And pastors are taking advantage of that.
There's a little secret I don't know that everybody knows that I've realized. Like we've had mild success getting people to fill out a digital connection card. But when you come into a Zoom webinar for worship, you put your name and your email, and then you have a report of that on the back end of it.
Yeah. So connection is huge, and in some ways stronger than ever.
Yeah. All right, George, where have you seen adaptation or your church being different than it was before?
Yeah, so right on the front end, my operational team that you sat in with when you visited with us last summer, and our operational team is the campus pastors that lead the generative communities of Grace Church. Right on the very front end, we said, we need to drill down and say, what are going to be our values that drive our decisions about ministry? And so I know it's simple, but just getting it written down to say, these are the 2 or 3 things that are going to be our non-negotiables, our fighting words, if you will. And one of them was, we said, we're going to trust the faithfulness of God in the past. We've been through the Great Recession. Cape Coral was the first community in to the Great Recession, highest foreclosure rate in America. We've seen God be faithful in the past. So we're going to trust in the faithfulness. I mean, secondly, we said, we'll only do what we can do. I think one of the dangers of social media is we can see what other people are doing and feel like we have to do all of that. But we can only do what we can do. And then thirdly, we decided we could only do what we can do when we can do it. Again, we all have limitations of resources and time and those kinds of things. And with those things kind of driving us, we pretty quickly felt like what we needed to do was really just to get up to speed on our online platforms. We basically had a website, a Facebook page, and an app which was connected to our website. And so we immediately, I say immediately, over a couple of weeks, we opened up an Apple TV site, a Roku site, and there's a third one. So we now have 6 platforms for the original campus, and then 2 platforms each for the 3 smaller campuses. And to our listeners and viewers, one of the unique things about Grace Church is we have one church that's very, very large, and then 3 medium or small sized churches. Our smallest church has about 100 in attendance. And then the largest has almost 2,000 in attendance. So we kind of run the scale from very small, or from small to very large church. And so we got up to speed digitally. And then I think one of the things that changed for us is, I think all of us have made the shift from Mr. Wesley's house calls to the internet's mouse calls. And what changed for us is
that was bad, George. That was bad.
From house calls to mouse calls, but then we went to phone calls.
Okay.
We kind of went back to the future, to phone calls. To Kim's point, through our Connect ministries, which is our ministries that seek to connect people to Jesus and to Grace Church, we enlisted at the main campus, which is where I do the majority of my work. We enlisted 43 people, and in the last 6 weeks, they've called over 4,500 people.
Wow.
And so we have these long prayer lists that we could have thousands of people coming on the weekend, filling out these Let's Connect cards and get 17 prayer concerns. And now we have page after page of prayer concerns. And the cool thing is we're able to check on them, every couple of weeks. If there's emergencies, I get the list, and we pastors, we call them. And, I've made more phone calls than ever before. What's been different for us has been figuring out how to reach out to the community. Grace Church is a passionately outreach-focused church. And we've had 3 school partnerships, a high school and 2 elementary schools that are Title I or Title V schools. And we said, what can we do? I have this hunch about the giving I want to make sure I get to, but we decided that we would bless the teachers with gift bags. And so we sent out 196 gift bags with our, if you need prayer, send this to us. And some have called us and we prayed for them. And you say, well, how do you fund that? Well, number one, as somebody put in the comments, our expenses are down.
Yeah.
So as you said, you can use your flower money from the altar to flowers for the community. So that's down. I think giving is up in churches that are seeking to be innovative in their outreach, and people are saying, I will fund that. I will sacrifice so that my church can do that, even though I might not be able to go do it. So, everybody wants to help the first responders, and we have a hospital just 2 miles from us. So we gathered a bunch of gift bags and took 200 gift bags. But then I think part of the secret, Tom, is we've reported back. I think you saw the video we did this weekend, about a 5-minute video that reported back to say, even though many of you can't do the hands-on ministry that you're used to doing, here's what we collectively are doing together safely. And we are blessing 3 schools, a hospital. We're partnering with the Homeless Coalition. They needed towels, and we were able to get, hundreds of towels out to them for our homeless friends, our friends who are experiencing homelessness. The other thing I would say, Tom, is that I think I remember reading that book a few months back called The First 90 Days.
Yeah.
About and one of the big principles there is get a victory in the first 90 days.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought, what could be our victory? What would be a victory for us? And I said, it's so counterintuitive. Our team said, we're going to add 2 global mission partners and announce it during the pandemic. That our church isn't going backwards on our global ministry. We're going forward.
Yeah.
And we actually took a young couple from Thailand and shot a video and showed that in church last weekend. And the giving goes up because people are saying, my church is not sitting on its hands. My church is advancing, joining Jesus in his mission, and we're advancing into the world.
Your comment about that book, The First 90 Days, I'm trying to remember the name of the author of that, but I read it when I started here at Sycamore Creek, and then Mark and I read it together when he started. And there's something I think really important to understand underneath that could easily go by us if we just think about how you implemented that with this big win, is that your mindset has shifted to that you're in the first 90 days of a new appointment.
Yes.
New church.
Yes.
And it's different. It's not the same church that it was before. And so you actually went back to a book about being in the first 90 days. And that's a different way of thinking as a leader.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go over to Mark here. Mark and I read that and actually put together a plan based on that book. And I think it's just a business book. It's not a particularly business book, or at least the one that we read. So Mark, what's different about Sycamore Creek in Potterville than before in one of those areas of ministry or leadership?
Well, I definitely resonate with what George said about, having to think about this as something completely new. We had a new thing in Potterville of an adoption 3.5 years ago, and there's been a slow transition toward being more and more online. What we're currently doing has rapidly accelerated that transition. And to give you an idea of the size of our church in Potterville, when I first started, we were averaging about 50 to 60 people in attendance, and now we average about 90 to 100 people in attendance. So we're still a pretty small church. And what that means, I like how, George, you mentioned you have to figure out what you can do and what you can't do. Small churches have a lot of limitations placed on them. We just don't have the resources that a larger church has. And part of that is just even something as simple as the internet infrastructure in a small town. I was just on a call with some pastors earlier, and one of the pastors either has a choice of a mobile hotspot or satellite internet, and that's it. And so, pastors are having to be creative in how we get online, given the limitations that we have. And one of the aspects of that is internet. The other aspect, I think, is just the people that we have to work with, the resources that we have to work with. So we've been able to make that transition pretty well in Potterville. And what we do is we have a Facebook and YouTube release of our worship services, and we pre-record everything. We're limited in what we can do live with the internet, again, and the resources that we have. And so I think the challenge for smaller churches is to kind of take some of what bigger churches are doing and the ways they're leading, and then figure out how to adapt them into our smaller town context. And I hope that we're being innovative and we're leading, but we're trying to adapt things, and we're constantly having to figure out, well, okay, they did that with X number of dollars. How can we do something similar in our small town that still has a big impact? The other thing that I think we've done in the midst of that is when we produce worship, all of a sudden it went from something that there were dozens and dozens of people involved on a Sunday morning, and now there's very few people involved in producing a worship service. And so we've been working to try to figure out how do we get more people involved in the mission of our church. And I think kind of going back to one of the things that's still the same in the midst of this is people still want a sense of mission and a sense of call. And George, I love that you said that, that essentially you said money follows mission. And where there's a strong sense of mission, people will support that. And I think they want to support it with their money, but they also want to support it with their time. And so we've been trying to figure out things that individuals can do. I mean, clearly you can't get a big group of people together right now to do something, but find things that individuals can do to make a difference. So one person in our community is exploring setting up a page on Facebook where people can swap items that they need. It's a porch swap. So you put it out on your front porch, you arrange a pickup time, you have it all wiped down and sanitized, and that person can come and pick it up and take it on to the next person. We've had people do outdoor like cleanup projects, like cleaning up bushes and weeding and things like that. Again, where you don't need to be around people, but individuals can make a difference. And what we're seeing is a transition, I think, in terms of our worship. From worship has been a big thing where a lot of people are involved. You know, we have people who are ushering and greeting, and there's kids ministry and all these things, to now redeploying volunteers out of their houses to how can they make a difference from their house. And I think the fun thing has been to challenge people to do that and to get their imagination to grow. It's a different way of thinking about what it means to be a part of a church. And it's something that we've been pushing for the past 3 years through this adoption, that the church is not the building. It's not what happens on Sunday morning. It's much bigger than that. And I've seen an acceleration of that process through this pandemic and the move to more digital forms of worship. Finally, a last thing I think that ties in with all of this is communication. We often relied a lot on our worship services for communication. And one of the things we've pivoted toward that I think we probably should have done before and will continue to do is a lot of email and text communication with our congregation. So we've created a couple different forms of communication with our church. One is a daily email. So people get a daily email letting them know things that are going on. And that's been really helpful in part because our schedules have shifted right now. We're not thinking out 2-3 months in advance right now. People have a lot of flexibility in their schedules. And so we found that communication method to be really effective to give people the information they need for things that are going on throughout our community. We also do a weekly email with a recognition that some people, like I have young kids at home, they're in school right now online. Each of my kids has 6 different teachers who are sending out things. I'm getting emails for work. I'm getting emails from the school. If the church starts piling it on, it gets to be a lot. And so we've also given people the option to just get a weekly summary that summarizes what's happening in the upcoming week. And we've recognized in the midst of this that sort of one size fits all stuff is not very effective, that we need to be able to tailor to reach specific people with specific needs in this time.
These are, this whole thing is jogging my imagination and brainstorming, which is my secret plan for holding these webinars, was just so I could get ideas from good people. So thank you all for sharing those stories and examples of the church living out its mission in a different world. I want to turn to questions that people have, well, they're going to post them now because I'm asking for them. But what questions do you all have? I've noticed whenever I participate in webinars that people don't start posting the questions until we actually get to the Q&A section. So Leslie, are there any questions that I have missed at this point or that I'm not seeing that you want to raise, or are we going to keep chatting for a little bit while people are typing in their questions?
I don't know how to spotlight myself. Sorry, Tom, but George answered the one question that was in there, and so we don't have that. But I'm just wondering, with something Mark said about parents having kids with 6 sets of teachers sending out information. Is anybody doing anything specific to support parents of especially elementary or middle school parents, or even older kids, in terms of these are such unprecedented times. How can we support parents trying to maybe work full time and keep their cats herded
I'll pay you later, Leslie, for asking that question.
Well, Tom, I know that our family ministry, and again, this is, scale sometimes allows for things, but our family ministries have always, even previous to this, tried to be, we kind of live under the directive of the Orange Ministry, that we try to help parents become the spiritual champions of their children.
Yeah.
And so we've regularly tried to resource parents digitally. Of course, that's gone way up. I think this is, Leslie, this may fall outside of the parameters of what you were thinking, but I have 4 grandkids that live not far from me, and so I get to see them a couple of times a week. They'll be coming over tonight to spend the night. And my grandkids look forward to seeing their children's ministry, worship leaders, small group leaders online. And every week at a certain time on Sunday, I think it's between services, like at 9:30, the kids can engage in live interactive worship with their worship leaders, and the Bible story and the conversations that they can have with their parents and siblings and guardians and grandparents or whoever's caring for them. And so to try to maintain some of that normalcy in their spiritual life, while at the same time then, kind of supplementing that with other digital material throughout the week.
Yeah.
That's been our biggest response. We've also done some of our leaders, the drive-by thing to the kids for their birthdays and those kinds of deals as well. Trying to be up on that kind of stuff.
Mark, you want to talk about what we were brainstorming for giving out Bibles to the kids?
Sure. So each year, kids who are finishing 2nd grade and heading to 3rd grade, they get a Bible from the church, and we usually do a ceremony and worship where we talk to those kids and talk to the parents too, and talk to them about how important faith instruction is in their homes. And this year we realized we'll be online probably for that worship service, not able to gather in person. We were like, well, how can we do this? And so we came up with the idea of
to an online Bible.
Yeah. So we came up with the idea of taking these Bibles and delivering them to kids' houses and recording that, and having that be a part of our worship service where families receive those Bibles and still have that milestone, but in a slightly different way. I think that's one thing is, giving a Bible and making sure that families continue to have spiritual encouragement and food. The other thing that we're trying to do is continue to provide support for parents who have young kids. And I think that the challenge is often the most helpful thing would be to just take their kids for a couple hours so they can get something else done. And we can't do that right now. But what we've been able to do is provide encouragement, provide people who are checking in and saying, how are you doing? I think particularly for parents who are parenting on their own, they really miss adult contact. It's hard to be on your own with kids all day long. And the church provides a really valuable resource there. Earlier we mentioned shut-ins, and they're getting more contact than ever. My hope is that parents who are parenting on their own are getting the same thing, and they're getting people who are checking in with them because they need that adult support.
An idea that hits me, this isn't something that the church was doing, but we have a niece who's been hired by a family to spend an hour with their kids online each day. And that teenage niece's job is to keep them engaged and entertained. It doesn't mean that they're, they may be like, she may be saying, hey, find this, or go find this, or draw this kind of a picture. That, it's an hour of freedom.
I do that with the middle schoolers. Our middle school youth group continues, and I've had multiple parents thank me for that hour where their kids were engaged and entertained, and they could do other stuff in that hour.
Leslie, we've got some other questions.
We do. We have a couple related ones more toward graduation. With it on, Melanie writes, with the graduation unfolding and still coming, how have you been planning anything new to celebrate these? High schoolers, college, trade schools, and Janet also asked for creative ideas for celebrating our graduates.
Kim, with all the churches you've been working with, have they talked at all about graduation or anything like that and what they're thinking about?
They have. They've been talking a lot about prom, and how to recreate prom for the seniors. And there's one that's working with a town to plan it for the summer when it is allowed back. And the church is actually funding the insurance because the insurance was an issue for the town gathering previous prom. And most are trying to find ways to do graduate Sunday like they would have done in church by requesting the families to create their own videos and putting together a montage of videos, talking with the kids, talking about, what their hopes and dreams are, and really trying to connect the kids with the congregation, even though they aren't in the same place.
Yeah. We, I was planning, I have a really strong team of people preaching in my church besides just me. And so I was planning on tag team preaching with a graduate on graduation Sunday. And she and I, I lead a high school small group each Sunday night. So I've been touching base every week with the high schoolers, which has been really a pleasure through this time. But she and I are still planning on tag team preaching together. We're just going to do it online, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but we're going to figure it out. And I'm sure there'll be, like, one thing I've noticed is there's a lot more challenges, but there's also a lot more grace. Like, people will appreciate whatever happens tag team wise between me and her. George, anything your church is doing with graduates or graduation?
So Mark talked about using people to do things like read scripture or offer prayers and those kinds of things. So we're trying to intentionally, touch base with them. I'm preaching a message week after next. We're trying to stay several weeks ahead in pre-production stuff. And I'm mentioning it's a part of my message of it's a pastoral empathetic deal. We feel for you, kind of deal. So I think there's some of those realities. Some pastors here in the town, I think we need to also think, even outside of our tribe, some pastors here in town, one of them is doing drive-in church very well. And he and I are having conversations of hosting a drive-in graduation where they could actually robe up, social distancing, come on up, and now here's Tom Arthur graduating from, and everybody honks their horns and they go back down. So that's still very sketchy. We haven't nailed that down yet. A number of us are planning that.
That seems, so one thing I notice when I think about a question or an idea like that is, and something I've noticed is, if you didn't have relationships before this, you don't have relationships now.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have relationships, if somebody doesn't have relationships with the high school, to sort of pull that off, or to like that kind of idea can go along those networks.
Yeah.
That seems like it would be really challenging to pull off. So there's a way that this pandemic is pushing on the stress points, or running along like the neural pathways that we have already built. And so I'm thinking, like, we don't have any relationships with high school as a church, except for like the high schoolers in our small groups. But we do have relationship with the local middle school, which is grades 4, 5, and 6. And so while your idea of a drive-through thing for them, I mean, we think it's making me think, okay, I'm not going to do that with high schoolers, but I might be able to do it with 6th graders coming out of that middle school. Any more questions?
Yeah, we do, Tom. One more question that's kind of brass tacks. How are you working through the security concerns with Zoom and with your congregation?
Who wants to take that one? Hey, Mark, you want to reflect on that a little bit here? Your process is a little bit different and kind of sidesteps that altogether.
Well, I think Zoom is a concern because we're using it for all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're on it right now. We use Zoom for meetings all the time. I'm using it for small groups. Generally, what we've found is that with the enhanced security measures that they've added, making all the everything password required now, we've found it to be a very stable and user-friendly platform, and we've not had any issues as a church with people hacking into it or trying to come onto meetings. Now, we're not using it to share any sensitive information though either, and so you might be talking about yourself, but we're not sharing any financial data or anything like that through something like a Zoom meeting. If you really want to hear about my relationship with my wife or how things are going with my kids, I don't have any trouble with people hearing about those things. And so we've continued to use Zoom for that sort of communication. And then, like you mentioned, Tom, in Lansing, that campus is using Zoom as part of their worship. We're not using Zoom for our worship in Potterville. And so we've sort of sidestepped there the potential for any problem with Zoom related to our worship.
Hey, Tom, we found I don't think it'd be called second party source that's been very helpful to all of our ministries. It's b.live. And they do, it's a platform that allows you to go on to other platforms. And so you can send it to Facebook Live. And it's very secure. It's pretty inexpensive. They run a 14-day free trial. And I just used it for a Bible study. And it was a remarkably stable and very secure platform. We're able to do praise and worship with our children on it and have the different praise and worship leaders at their houses and the words. And it's just really cool and very secure. It's much more user-friendly. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that on Zoom about one of its competitors, but b.live.
B.live. I think that's something that each one of us has had to sort of figure out what platform we were going to go with. And probably most of us started with, we didn't have the resources to do a bunch of research up front. You just had to go with what you knew and figure it out. But we're in a phase now where probably all of us are starting to evaluate, is the platform we've chosen the one we want to stick with? Because it's we're going to be doing this for a while. If not, like you said, George, you had this little subsidiary thing over here. I don't remember exact words you used, and now it's like the main thing.
Yeah.
And so figuring out if the way you're using or the infrastructure you're using to make it the main thing is there.
Yeah, and what I would say is, like, for normal meetings and even certain kinds of seminars and workshops, this is absolutely perfect. But the expandability for things like our children's worship, for one of our fresh expressions that we meet at a trailer park, it's perfect because we're able to use it with some innovative kinds of ways. So I do think the application matters, where you're trying to use it.
You were saying that
it's not a one-size-fit-all things.
be.live.
BE.live.
Yeah. Hey, Kim, what are you seeing out there as far as platforms that churches are using for creating environments for ministry?
They really have a myriad of different things. I mean, from just Facebook Live to Zoom to some places are doing more of a creating videos and posting them rather than trying to do it live.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter of, some of it is what's available. Like Mark was saying, in terms of internet speed and connection and safety, how do you do a private Zoom meeting so that you don't have to worry about somebody coming in? And we did have one pastor have somebody kind of jump in and do some inappropriate things during their Zoom meeting. So they're trying to figure out what's best for each context. I do think with worship, we're beginning to see some shifts. There are some people that want to have that online live experience, but at the same time, there are others who are finding out that they are interested in viewing worship, but they don't necessarily feel like they have to be there while it's happening live at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. And so some churches are beginning to move to kind of a menu of options, where you have the message, you have a children's moment, you have meditation or quiet time, you have music, and they can kind of click on the things that apply to them and that they need at that time. So that's been an interesting scenario.
That's an area that we haven't really talked much about, and we've kind of run out of time, but it does strike me, and this was the letter that I originally wrote out to advertise this, is that the architecture of online or digital is different than the architecture of an actual building.
Yeah.
And how what the expectations of those different architectures are. You're either going to go with the flow of that, those set of expectations, or go against it. And I think about some of the YouTube channels that I pay attention to and watch with my kids, and they may be an hour-long show, but when you engage it on YouTube, it's in segments that are like 10 to 12 minutes long.
Right.
So there may be one segment of the hour-long show that's got like all the views and it's been shared a bunch of times, but and you may only engage that one little 12-minute segment, or there may be a segment that you really like and that you always look forward to it, and you just jump to that one over it. Right. And I've been pondering with my worship leader how we could create something like that.
And I would argue that there's online worship, and then there's online programming or online ministry or whatever you want to call it. And I think many of us were already doing online worship. We might not have had hosts and text to give numbers and all that sort of stuff, and we've gotten better at that. And I hope we'll continue to stay better at that after all of this is done. What I think is the unknown is what you're saying, is this whole nother genre out here of online digital generative communities that become places where people can consider the claims of God on their life, step into faith in Jesus, and enter into community and online, and even serve and give, and it being in that whole environment. And I think that's a big unknown for many of us.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's exciting because I think we've seen worship services almost across the board increase in attendance. Where churches were having 40 now, they're having over 100 live worshipers, and then it's being shared on social media and viewed over 1,000 times. And so people are connecting in a new way. And while sometimes people had a hard time inviting people to church and maybe bringing them to the building for whatever reason they got nervous about inviting people, they seem to be less nervous about inviting them to a watch party on Facebook, or sending a link to a live worship online and saying, hey, my church is going live if you want to watch it. And so people are using this as an opportunity to invite people to their church, and they seem to be doing it more than they did in person.
Kim, that's a great transition to our end here. But first, friends, I want to join me in thanking God for George, Kim, and Mark. Put some love in the comments section of Facebook or here on Zoom. And if you know somebody who could use this webinar, a pastor or a church leader, you'll find it on the Reach Summit Facebook page, and you can share it with them there. Or just share it on your timeline for others to gain some help in thinking about how to be the church different. The Reach team is still working hard to build a movement of churches that grow and multiply, so be sure to check out some of the resources that we provide. Don't forget to like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Reach Summit MI. That way you'll have access to the recording of this webinar and the 2 upcoming webinars that we'll be doing, and you can share those recordings with your friends or with your church. We're excited to have a stellar group of leaders over the next 2 weeks. On May 14th, we have at 1 p.m. John Ferguson, the founding pastor of Community Christian Church and New Thing in Chicago, the New Thing Network. Rachel Gilmore, a church planter and Path One staff who helps assess and train church planters. She's also one of our keynote speakers at the Reach Summit this year. And Eric Keeb, the lead pastor of Grace Church, a multi-site in the Bay City area. That's on Thursday, May 14th at 1 p.m. Then the next Thursday, May 21st at 1 p.m., Michael Beck, his name's been mentioned several times here. He's the pastor of Wildwood United Methodist Church in Florida and a pioneer in the Fresh Expressions movement. I mean, that's where we're at right now, fresh expressions and pioneering into those. Olu Brown will also be with us, the founding pastor of multicultural and fast-growing Impact Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And Kathy Townley, a worship coach and consultant working with new starts and existing churches. So put those on your calendar, plan to join us again live for those. Check out our website, reachresources.org, for a monthly podcast where I interview a pastor, an author, a consultant, or a coach about some area of ministry. Right now, we've recorded 26 episodes that cover topics from fresh expressions to vital mergers and from taking a sabbatical to starting a dinner church. Don't miss that catalog of great conversations there at reachresources.org. Be sure also to check out reachsummit.org, where you can stay up to date about our annual Reach Summit in the fall. We are brainstorming right now. We're in the brainstorming stage about whether this year's summit will be in person or online. So keep in the know at reachsummit.org. Thank you so much for taking a step towards being a church different in a different world. I want to end with a favorite prayer of mine from the Book of Common Prayer that I think is even more relevant right now for today. So join me in prayer. This is another day, O Lord. I know not what it will bring forth, but make me ready, Lord, for whatever it may be. If I am to stand up, help me to stand bravely. If I am to sit still, help me to sit quietly. If I am to lie low, help me to do it patiently. And if I am to do nothing, let me do it gallantly. Make these words more than words, and give me the Spirit of Jesus. And all who agreed said, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Hey friends, there is no way to gracefully end one of these webinars. I just hit the end button and all of a sudden it is over. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. Peace, friends.